Hello and welcome to part 2 of Propaganda. In this video, I'm going to delve a little bit more deeply into the way Edward Bernays worked, and also at the end of the video, I'm going to talk about a couple of things that you and me need to really look out for these days to avoid us being overly manipulated. It's connected to emotions and it's connected to how we're being encouraged to consider groups and or individuals. Here you will see Edward Bernays, the original influencer, is described as someone having an uncanny ability to mould public desire, making him one of the 20th century's most influential and crucially yet invisible characters, the architect of modern mass manipulation. And I do not think that that is overstating things at all. The more you look at Bernays, the more you realise that, wow, this guy really was doing so much behind the scenes that people were absolutely not aware of. And I come back to saying, reminding me to remind you that this still goes on. And his proteges are hard at work, present day. So it begins. Again, we're looking here at torches of freedom. Bernays' client, George W. Hill, president of the American Tobacco Company, had asked him, how can we get women to smoke on the street? They're smoking indoors, but damn it, that almost feels like it needs an American accent. But damn it, if they spend half the time outdoors and we can get them to smoke outdoors, we'll damn near double our female market. Do something, act. Again, whether that's apocryphal or not, I don't know, but it would seem that George W. Hill did say something like that to Bernays. Bernays began to ponder. He was a ponderer. How best to employ the theories which had already proven so effective in his public relations campaigns. Gustave Le Bon's principles of mass psychology, you would see that in different ways during lockdowns and the stuff all around it. Wilfred Trotter's herd instinct. Trotter's herd instinct. There's an aptonym if ever I saw one. Thesis. And above all, the hidden drives of human beings that Sigmund Freud, Bernays' Uncle Siggy, in Vienna spoke about Uncle Cigarette, as it turned out. Bernays needed advice and consulted the psychiatrist A.A. Brill, I've mentioned him before, who'd been one of Freud's pupils. What, he asked Brill, is the psychological basis for a woman's desire to smoke? Cigarettes are equated with men, came the reply. Become torches of freedom. So that's where Bernays got the idea. That was Bernays' inspiration, his campaign to get young feminists to light up cigarettes, torches of freedom, in public as an act of emancipation during New York's Easter parade. This, he believed, would make its way into the nation's newspapers. Now, first thing to note there is that what Bernays was tapping into was something that was already there. This sense that a lot of women had about repression, suppression, their inability to be as free as men to do what they wanted. So freedom, emotions, desires to move around socially and interact and act in a way that other people in the group, 50% of the group, did. And so there is the Freudian part, or at least in part, the Freudian part. And the furore, the simmering annoyance that was just bubbling up here and there was already present. So Bernays, acting on instructions of the American Tobacco Company, has looked at the situation and thought, well, they already are annoyed. What can we do? Annoyed about not being able to smoke in public, amongst other things. What can we do? Well, we can call them torches of freedom. Again, it wasn't his idea, but he took it and ran with it. And so what the women were doing was thinking, when we light up, we're defying, we're showing that we can do this just like men and try and stop us. Again, the sentiment I totally agree with, but as we know now, cigarettes are, well, extremely bad for your health. And as I mentioned before, at the same time as this, Bernays is telling his wife to stop smoking, which one has got to think about the ethics of all this, particularly from the lens of present day. But even then, that does not seem right. Then, talking about ethics, let's move on a little bit, because what we have to look at is that before he launched this whole PR stunt, he still had to take care of a crucial issue, to give instructions to Bertha Hunt. She was Bernays' secretary, but at his behest, she was to forget that for a few days. She was to forget that for a few days, like Jason Bourne. She had to pass herself off as a women's rights advocate and drum up comrades in arms for the feminist Torches of Freedom campaign. No inference to American tobacco was to be permitted. So two things there. One, in the mix, as I mentioned before, it has been written, were models, people to move around and light these torches of freedom. So they were there. They were hired to be there. And the second thing, no inference to American tobacco, or indeed Bernays. So this was to be seen as spontaneous, grassroots. And this has happened in different ways more than once, and still happens today. Things that seem spontaneous are not always that at all. And what we have here is, of course, the driver of profit, the driver to get to that market. To be fair, the real health threats of cigarettes were not understood in the way that they are now back then. But still, whoever thought inhaling smoke was a good idea? Anyway, what I'm hoping to have illustrated there is that Bernays was just hacking in, essentially, to something that was already bubbling away. Then let's look here. Edward Bernays and why we eat bacon for breakfast. I mean, I know not everyone does. And then a subtitle, believe it or not, people had to be convinced to eat bacon for breakfast. It's sort of gone more out of favour these days for different reasons with quite a few people, not everyone, but there was a time when it was more popular than it was now, and before that it wasn't popular. In the 1920s, the Beech Nut Packing Company wanted to sell more bacon, so it hired Edward Bernays. He was somebody who was in great demand. I mean, he really was. So the survey says bacon. At the turn of the 20th century, a light breakfast was the norm in America. Most people had coffee and a roll, maybe some cereal. So Bernays asked his agency's doctor, yes, his PR agency had a doctor on staff, goodness knows why, if a larger meal in the morning would be better for people's health. The doctor said, yes, more energy at the start of the day is a good thing. Bernays then had the doctor write to 5,000 of his closest doctor friends. Friends is probably important in this. If they agreed, more than 4,500 wrote back saying they did. That gave Bernays a story to pitch. 4,500 physicians urge Americans to eat heavy breakfasts to improve their health. The newspaper headlines read. Many of them also reference bacon and eggs as the perfect hearty breakfast. How Bernays changed the world through PR, changed the world in ways that are still felt today. Again, we'll see there, dubbed the father of spin, public relations, and as I've said, propaganda. Under dictator George Ubico, perhaps the wrong pronunciation, the United Fruit Company, now Chiquita Brands International, gained control of 42% of land in Guatemala and enjoyed tax exemptions and freedom from import duties. Very nice. Then in 1953, the socialist government by Jacobo Arbenz redistributed the company's land to the citizens who worked it. So he redistributed it back to the people who actually worked on that land. Not a bad thing, is it? So United Fruit hired Bernays to restore Guatemala to, and I'm quoting, banana republic. And then, and this is where it gets just again like something from a movie. Bernays flew influential journalists to Guatemala, entertained them, and arranged them to meet politicians who said Arbenz was a communist controlled by Moscow. And we hear things like that bandied about these days, do we not? Whether they're true or not, well, I don't know. But isn't it interesting? This was being used then. Then the media witnessed a violent anti-American demonstration in the capital, thought to be organised by Bernays himself. Now, whether that's true, whether he just decided to say he somehow was involved in it, or just did the no comment thing, I don't know. But if it wasn't organised deliberately, then it was certainly fortuitous for Bernays. He even created a fake news agency in the US called the Middle American Information Bureau that issued many press releases saying the Soviets planned to use Guatemala to launch attacks on the US. Attacks on the US again. That will certainly stir up the emotions. Many prominent members of the Eisenhower administration had ties to United Fruit, which helped lead the CIA to train and arm rebels to topple the government. Planes flown by CIA pilots dropped bombs in Guatemala City, which Bernays portrayed as freedom-fighting efforts. Benz resigned and fled the country on June 27, 54, and Bernays produced stacks of Marxist literature the public was told were found in the vacated presidential palace. I mean, that's a stroke of evil genius, isn't it? If true. And I've read several accounts that seem to all align with this one. I still find it difficult to believe. Certainly ethically, I find it appalling if it's true. And as far as I understand, it seems to be. In a televised event, Vice President Richard Nixon flew to Guatemala to congratulate the CIA-backed new leader, Colonel Castillo Armas, and his citizens for overthrowing its communist rulers and bringing in liberty and prosperity. Soon Armas reversed much of the land reforms, and went on to arrest and kill thousands of political opponents. Absolutely appalling. Absolutely dreadful. And what are we to make of that? Well, again, Bernays, in terms of ethics, morals, conscience, I find the gentleman questionable. Maybe these accounts are exaggerated, but they're not all. And there are a lot of people writing about Bernays, and that's the tip of the iceberg, the things that this guy got involved in. And so where does that leave us today? It leaves us really needing to be vigilant and crucially to stay calm. If you look around you, I've talked about it before, that the ordinary folk card that the politicians and leaders try and play. You know, I'm stacking bricks, I'm working here beside farmers, I drive this type of car, I don't wear expensive watches, and my dad's a tool maker, and so on. And part of me thinks, okay, yeah, I can see why you would want to not look different and not look elite. But I don't think it's fooling anyone. In fact, these days it's likely to cause more division. The Labour Party in the UK, at the time of recording, this is coming in for quite a bit of flack from different angles. So we've got the winter fuel payments withdrawal. We've got the fact that the person who's involved in that, the Chancellor, was claiming for, I think it was heating allowance or bills for second accommodation. And as I've said before, that's not bad in of itself. One could argue that, of course, people in that position of influence and pressure need to be able to be in more than one place at once. But as I've also said, the optics are bad. It looks very much like you are just, you know, the great unwashed. Eat cake. And we're different, we're special. And of course, all the freebies that Keir Starmer appears to have been garnering over the years. And I think I saw a headline that said, well, you know, we're in opposition then, but now we're in power, that's got to stop. It shouldn't have been happening in the first place. What are you doing? Opposition. You know, difficult to tell anybody apart these days, isn't it? And so the card of the ordinary folk is being played. The spin, well, it's everywhere. That brings me to one of the key things that can be used against all of us these days. And that, of course, is to drive our emotional thinking, but specifically to do one or two things. And I need to revisit, before I talk about that, the old style TVs, John Logie Baird, where we can make out, yeah, there's a face there, but I probably couldn't recognize that person in the street, and I'm not really sure what emotion they're experiencing. It's low resolution, but it's just enough resolution for me to be able to say, yeah, it's a person, it's a face. And that's like emotions. They're crude, we can do things, we can make certain decisions, but they're not very well considered. They're not subtle, they're not nuanced, they're often not logical. Over here, these days, we have higher resolution images. So if you just use the TV example, it's 4K, 8K for some, if you can afford it. And when that happens, we get more detail, we get more nuance in the colours, we get more, of course, resolution. We can work out perhaps, oh, hold on a second, that wasn't a shadow, there was something in there, there was more information available. And when we're calmer, we can look at things from that more considered perspective, more detailed perspective, ability to weigh up things in a more logical way. And what do a lot of people out there want us to be doing? Do they want us here or here? They want us here, of course. They want us being driven by emotions, and they want to access those emotions, just like Bernays was doing. And so the two things to be aware of: demonizing and deifying. Both are likely wrong. I'm not saying there are not people who are exceptionally good and people who are evil. Those do exist. And there are groups like that as well. But by and large, the picture is more nuanced. So someone's being demonized. We need to understand, rather than just the emotional language, is what is being said true? Do they lie all the time? Do they lie? You know, is this an individual who's cruel to defenseless animals and so on? Is that really who they are? Or is it simply that they say something that's different that we might disagree with? But maybe they say other things that we would agree with, but our emotions are too strong. It's like a force field, an energy field that we cannot see through, or we don't allow ourselves to see through because we just dismiss them. And over here, the halo effect, when people are deified, well, newsflash, I don't think anybody who's been deified or getting close to it these days is an actual deity, so beware. But it's like, wow, you know, they're going to save us. It's going to be wonderful. They're just great. Everything they say is like this, just nectar. Where have you been all this time? And that's nonsense as well. Absolute nonsense. They are also flawed. They have things about them that you and I probably would not agree with, might even vehemently disagree with. And so, again, we've got to consider when we're being sold either of these ways of looking at people, what is actually going on. To do that, we need facts. To do that, we need to listen. To do that, we need to question. To do that, we need to demand that there is transparency and there is honesty.